Welcome to LRIC's 10th Horizon Series webinar. These webinars are looking at the big things facing Ontario's livestock sector, and I'm very pleased that they've been very successful. Thanks to you, and thanks to some tremendous speakers, we've had a really good series. This one is a little different, looking at even a step back from some of the issues, looking at how do we look at disruptors facing the sector. As we hit number 10 in the series, we do have another couple of topics that we want to be exploring in upcoming Horizon Series webinars, but we are open to new ideas. So if you have some ideas for topics, please do let us know. And thanks again for joining. And now I'll turn it over to Chloe Neudorf to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Mike. Today we are pleased to welcome Deb Stark, former Deputy Minister of Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, as our speaker. Deb is a veterinarian and has built tremendous respect from industry during her career. She is actively retired, staying well connected to industry and contributing as a board member of both the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute and Ontario Genomics. Deb is author of the white paper for this topic and comes well-versed in handling disruptions. We are delighted to have Deb Stark as LRIC's expert on embracing disruptors facing Ontario's livestock industry.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, Chloe, and thanks, Mike. I want to start by acknowledging that I live in Central Wellington, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, and a territory that's been inhabited by other nations, including the Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Grand River Métis Council. So like so many others, since this is 10th in the story, this talk came because Mike and Jean asked me to talk about disruptors facing the livestock sector. And I don't know anybody that can say no to either one of those people individually. And when you put them together, they're a powerful force. You just can't resist it. But I thought about building a list, and I realized I'm not sure another list would make a big difference. I'm not sure I'm any better placed than any of you to think about that. And I did wonder whether or not it'd be more useful to be talking about how do we view disruptors and how do we handle the change that's coming through the system? Does it make sense to look at it all as one big mass and look at them all in the same way? Or can we categorize them and therefore be more thoughtful about how we respond? And I think we can. And so that's kind of the genesis of this talk. So I wanted to give a little bit of a definition of what disruption is. There's many definitions. I'll just pick one so we're all on the same plate. I will talk about what I see as the different types of disruptors. I think there's 2 and even 3, maybe there's more types. And that's important, I think, that we look at it that way, because I'm going to suggest that different types of disruptors merit different types of responses. And I'm actually looking for feedback. I'm hoping afterwards, maybe we can have a bit of conversation about that proposal and whether or not it makes sense to you. And then I will zero in on what I call the enhanced surveillance for social and technological change. How do we get better at anticipating these things and therefore responding? And because, as I said, you can't say no to Mike and Jean, I will finish off by sharing a few items that are on my watch list. The bottom line is that strategic ability, or the ability to respond to something that knocks you off your strategic plan, has never been more important. With climate change, technology, geopolitical instability, it's all coming at us at the same time. It's important for businesses, for government, and for industry associations to really be thinking about what's coming at you and how to approach it. All disruptors are not alike. Before we start, I will start with a definition. As I say, there's a few of them. I like this one. A shock to the system that causes a fundamental shift in how the sector operates. So the emphasis isn't really the shock. The emphasis is on what's the change in the business model for the sector. And when we look at it that way, I think we can look at disruptors in two different ways. One is the nature-based events, and coming from the ag and poultry industry, I know you're familiar with these. These are the animal diseases. These are the droughts, the fires, the floods. And we look at them through an emergency management framework. So the emphasis is on managing risk, reducing the hazard, reducing the exposure, increasing the resilience. And the work is divided into 4 categories. And I have the Ag and Agri-Food Canada Emergency Response Framework up here. It's divided into prevention or mitigation, preparedness, response, or recovery. I think global pandemics aside, usually the changes to the business structure are temporary, unless they're proactive. And changes that we voluntarily make. And I think the best example of that is the biosecurity changes that have happened over the last couple of decades, again, in response to being better prepared for animal diseases. That's a disruption. We just proactively initiated that as opposed to having that come at us. There's a legislative role for the government and government agencies. They lead the response. Industry associations sit at the table and assist. And businesses basically look after themselves and comply with what they're being asked to do. And the only real question we have is how much time and energy that we're going to spend managing the risk, avoiding the risk, versus dealing with the consequences. There's another kind of disruptor, and that's the type that comes from social change or innovation. Things like a changing society, which asks us to be more thoughtful about how we actually treat people and animals that we are working with. New technology that proposes new solutions, be that cellular agriculture or robotics. These disruptors are disruptive, and they cause, they're a big threat to some, but they also offer huge opportunity, including new players. And although government may have a role in smoothing the transition, and it may have a role in setting standards, there isn't that same pressure for collective action. Businesses will get it or they won't. It's that simple. And the real question then becomes, how do you get on the right side of that? And I think the way to do that is to look at it through an innovation framework. And again, there's many of those. So I've just included an example of one of them on the right-hand side of the slide, but they all have the same kind of thought. The first thing is to define the problem or the opportunity or the pain point or what's happening and what opportunity could it be. The second one is to discover these different solutions. And I'm going to digress for just a second and say, this is an area where I think we should think more about. I think we tend in agriculture to go one problem, one solution, and away they go. If you really are taking an innovation and approach, then there's an incredible amount of time spent brainstorming what's the full range of solutions that could be considered, and then determining which one you want to pursue. So it's just, an aside, something to think a little bit more about. Then choose one, develop the prototype, and test the model. And understand that the first version won't be perfect. You test, iterate, change, adjust. That's an innovation approach. I've tried to summarize these two on one slide, just so you can really see the difference that I'm trying to emphasize here. So nature-based disruptors versus social and technological change, different risk, different approach to risk, different lens, and therefore different roles for government, industry, and individual businesses. So again, wouldn't mind some reaction to that. You can throw it into the chat, or maybe we can have that as part of the discussion afterwards. One thing I think that's common in both of these categories is that need for surveillance, to be constantly asking what's coming, what's out there, what could it mean? Disruptors don't come out of the blue. There's always early signs that something is changing. Melissa Clark-Reynolds is a futurist at the Future Centre of New Zealand, and she spoke at the Ontario Sheep Farmers AGM last fall. And she quoted a writer, William Gibson, who argued that the future has already arrived. It's just not evenly distributed yet. What's coming for you is actually happening somewhere else in the world. And she said that her job isn't about guessing, and it isn't about making up the future. It's about connecting dots. It's about seeing patterns It's about listening and reading. And when you see something, especially if you see it twice, it's about asking, what might that mean for me in my sector? And by the way, she has an excellent podcast about the future of meat that she did specifically for the pork sector at one time. It's on that website, futurecenter.new Zealand. I would really encourage you to take a look at that. But we know how to do surveillance for animal diseases, and we know how to watch for weather-related things, whether we're good at that or not. We should talk to the people in BC about that. But in theory, we know how to do surveillance for those kind of things. It's not quite as easy to have your eye on social and technological changes. It's really difficult, I think. So the question is, where do you look and where do you start? Well, I'd suggest that maybe you start by looking inside your sector. And one of the age-old sayings is still true: follow the money. Who's investing and where? We know that venture capital is starting to move into agriculture in a big way, into the precision ag, digitization of ag, the cellular ag, all that kind of space. So novel products, investment by VC more than doubled between 2019 and 2020. What could that mean? Talk with your customers. And I think this is really important. If you disagree with them, or if you don't understand, especially if you don't understand why they say, they've got a problem and what they need, listen even harder. There's probably a kernel in there. There's probably something worth pursuing. Watch where people are headed. Who's hiring? Who's not hiring? Who's training? How many community colleges in Ontario are now offering ag-related programming now? I was actually going to try and find that out before this talk, but I didn't. But there's quite a few of them now. What does that mean? Is it the Aggies that are starting the farms these days, or is it somebody else? All things to watch. And listen to the trade organizations and your farm organizations. They're being paid to thinking ahead because you want them to be helping you establish leadership and influence positions. So they're supposed to be watching for these issues. So listen to what they're talking about, what they're flagging. And maybe more importantly, ask them what they're afraid to talk to their members about. What do they see coming that they don't want to think about? That may be the most interesting question. But we also need to pay attention to the world in general, because disruption really occurs when technologies in different sectors come together. If it's just within your sector, it's more about innovation. It's the disruption when something else comes. The competition for dairy isn't US dairy industry. It's those bioengineers that are making ice cream from a fungus down in the States, or actually Ontario and Canada now. How do you look for that one? As I say, that's the challenge. And maybe again, this is a conversation that we could have, and people could tell me. I'd be interested in knowing where you start to look for these. There's just three that I put up here just as a suggestion. I'm always really interested in the World Economic Forum, especially their annual risk report, and I believe it will be out in the next few weeks. Not so much every year what they identify as the highest risk identified by business leaders, but the trends over time. You can really see things start to move. DataKit is a company, and then they have a newsletter, and they talk about Canadian investments in startups. So where's the venture capital, again, going into Canadian startups? So that's a really interesting one to be watching. And if you want your head to explode, try any of those futurist websites. I've put one up, futurist.com. The things that they see and worry about and pull together, just as I say, makes your head explode. If we talk a lot about planning for the future, and if William Gibson is right and the future is already here, maybe we really should be talking more and being more systematic about looking at what's already happening beside us. So that's kind of it. This is a fairly short talk, but it's a wild world out there. But I think there are ways of breaking down the noise and thinking about your approach. All disruptors aren't the same. Businesses, industry organization, and governments can play different roles depending on the type of disruption. And it really isn't all about risk. It is about opportunity. I really like the title of this series. It's Embracing Disruption, Not Being Afraid of Disruption. That's, I think that's a really right attitude. And maybe Dr. Seuss said it best. It's not about what it is, it's about what it can become. So I'm just going to shut off my slides there. But before we get to questions, I did promise you, like, you know, a little short list of what I see, what's on my watch list. And I've got 3 to identify. One is in the area of disease preparedness. So, you know, we know this. COVID is a pandemic. It is not the pandemic. 75% of the new infectious diseases come from animals. We hear this all the time. I think North American and specifically Canadian agriculture is doing a tremendous job preparing for those animal diseases where we have control. And if there's anybody from the Farm Animal Health and Welfare Council, congratulations on your movement to be building Animal Health Canada. I think that's absolutely the right initiative. I think if we can stay in control, I think we've got that well in hand. If the virus jumps and the main issue is spreading between humans, such as COVID now, I think, again, we understand our role and we have that, I think we have that well in hand as well. But what happens if livestock or poultry remain a source of spread of disease in a human pandemic or a serious human health condition? I think the reaction when we saw the COVID-19 in mink of some countries, the response has happened, should be a huge signal that this is something that we need to be thinking about. Maybe I just don't know, maybe somewhere, you know, those plans are all in the desk somewhere, but if not, that's the category that I wonder about. The second one I wanted to flag is water governance. I don't think I need to tell you about the challenges the world is facing when it comes to water issues, and they are absolutely getting worse, not better. But the question I'm starting to get more curious about is how is the world going to organize to address those issues? With over 20% of the world's fresh water sitting in the Great Lakes, especially close to us, I think we should be paying attention. If you're like me, you kind of know, the federal government is creating a national water agency. And again, maybe you're watching it more closely than I am. We should be watching. We're changing in Canada how we're going to approach water issues. And that's something that I think should be on the radar. And finally, I'm going to put on my Ontario Genomics hat just a second and talk about bioengineering and cellular agriculture. This disruption is well underway, but I'm not sure we appreciate the magnitude of it. We are starting to look at our genetic structure as just more about lines of code that anyone can code. That's got huge impacts on many, many sectors, and that's going to come at livestock and poultry in many different ways. Some good, some maybe not so good. I know you had a good conversation with Mike Van Masso last fall from the University of Guelph about cellular ag and the food side of it. And I agree with his conclusions. This is not the end of the world for the livestock industry. It is really not. But it is a reminder to concentrate on what's important to consumers, not just what's important to you. To think about consumers and all their diversity, not just the consumer. And to not be afraid to differentiate yourself, because that is the future. So I'll just stop there. I think we're ready to have comments or questions, and it looks like there's a few coming out. And yeah, thank you for your time. It'll be interesting to see where the conversation goes.
And thank you for your time, Deb. We really appreciate your insight and getting some brain cells working in a little different way. We do have some questions coming in. I'm gonna start with one from Rennie Van Ecker. And it is, well, he thanks you. And what's your perspective on the impact of artificial intelligence on the future?
I was debating. I just didn't know what to say about it. But the announcement that Facebook is not Facebook, it is now, it's the metaverse, right? And that's where a lot of time and energy is going to go. I don't know how that's going to change things, but I'm sure it will. I'm sure we just don't understand yet. So the whole artificial intelligence, machine learning, where we're going with that, again, it's like all of these, there will be good and there will be not so good. And our challenge is always, as a collective society, how do we have a conversation about what we're willing to do and what we're not willing to do? So yeah, I mean, we're seeing it already in terms of the, you know, facial recognition, and we're moving back. We did treat especially livestock and poultry as individuals, and then we got larger and we treated them as a group, and now we're moving back. The technology is allowing us to treat them as individuals again, and I think it's only going to continue.
Thanks. And imagine Mike McMorris has some questions. You mentioned following the money. So recently, the Farm Animal Investment Risk and Return, which is a collective investment network in the UK, which has $45 trillion under their management, was highly critical of livestock agriculture. And their chair made the statement, we are at an inflection point. And if we are to avoid the meat and dairy sector becoming a stranded asset, we must harness the leadership emerging in parts of the industry and transform the way our food, particularly protein, is produced. So Mike's asking, for Ontario livestock, where should that leadership come from?
Yeah, that is a really, really interesting question. And I think there is an inflection. You know, the extreme version that we will never eat another animal or get protein from livestock and poultry, I don't believe that. I have no idea how we think we can, given the land and the resources we have, how we can shift that all into just cellular ag and just fermenting yeast and different microbes. But anyway, you know, we'll see. The leadership, I think, it's going to come from new faces, and there's an opportunity to embrace those groups into the agriculture community or leave them on the as the over there. So one of the things that Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, CAPI, put together was a little bit of advice for a new minister to when after the federal election, and I wrote a little piece about how I think the Minister of Agriculture should be grabbing cellular ag and should be saying, this is agriculture. We need to embrace this. We need to figure out what it needs to be successful and bring it into the agriculture community, because those are the different voices. We know that the voice and the size of farms, and it's only getting bigger. So the people that are moving, that are in more conventional livestock, that is getting to be a smaller voice. It needs absolutely needs a more diverse approach. We need those scientists, those fermentation experts, those genetic coders. We need to embrace them and have them start to identify as agriculture as well. And that's how we'll be able to continue to influence that conversation.
Okay, I've got a question from Adahar Chowdhury, who's with he's a professor at the University of Guelph. And he said, very interesting presentation, Deb. I agree with your ideas of disruption, and the future is already here. It's about connecting dots. However, I think one point is missing, that we are living in a polarized world, and we don't consider political economy or of information and misinformation in agriculture. It explains why a farmer thinks that their neighbors are their celebrity, and that they believe or do what neighbors do or say. I think disruption needs to be considered from political economy of information or misinformation. What's your take on that?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just pulling that one up because I was having a little trouble. We don't consider political economy of information and misinformation. In other words, information has value. Is that the point when you talk about economy? Like, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. Disruption needs to be to consider from political economy of information or misinformation.
Well, maybe we'll Ada, you can respond in the chat, and we'll get that clarified.
Sure, certainly the polarization. I mean, yeah, that's a real risk to everybody, isn't it? And agriculture is not immune from that. And certainly there's a risk within agriculture. And as I argue that we need to be more diverse and bring more players in, there's there's even less of a homogeneous approach about what needs to happen for sure. Al Mussel from the Agri-Food Economy group did an interesting paper about the missing middle class when it comes to agriculture. So not just people, but in agriculture, and how the large farms are so different from smaller farms now. And that makes it really difficult to have a unified agriculture voice as well. So lots of divisiveness. That, I guess, that is the price of diversity. And I think that's all I can say for that one right now.
I've got another question here from Sheila Finn, and it goes to an issue that's happening right now with the recent BSE announcement of cattle in Newfoundland, resulting in China and the Philippines blocking all imports. And last time this happened, the sheep market also collapsed. She's a sheep farmer, so she's wondering if you have any thoughts, information on that.
I don't have any insight. I suspect there's someone else on this call that might have more current on that very specific incident, but I can just generally say, yes, one of the things in terms of disruption that agriculture really needs to be watching is this movement away globally from a rules-based trading system. And we have seen that in the last few years. 10 years ago, we had tables that worked well, and they only work when countries agreed to play by the rules. And as we are getting into more and more instability because of things like climate change, because of the technological change, because we are dividing as a society into those who have and those who do not have, those pressures are all putting pressures on government. They're not all responding in the same way. And I think we're going to see more of that, despite the trade agreements, despite everybody lining up and saying, here's how we're going to play, when push comes to shove, we don't play that way. I saw, and I can't remember where, but I saw an interesting comment just the other day that really made me think, and it was, the world failed in having a collective response to managing a pandemic. And if we can't, and that's about vaccination, that's about vaccination inequities, that's about, travel bans and things like that. And if we can't come together as a globe when we're facing a global pandemic, it really doesn't give you a lot of encouragement that we're going to be able to do so for other issues. Certainly not BSE in cattle. And so, sorry, sorry for the sheep guys.
That and Ada's got to put a note into the chat that I think that you answered his question from the looks of things.
What value to whom and how? Yeah, I think that's an interesting model to put the information versus the misinformation kind of model in as an economic model. I've never heard of that thinking before, but I think it's really interesting. And what could that show us? What could the lessons of economics show us about information versus information? And again, it's about the value being obtained, right? We've always had misinformation. We've always had propaganda. It's just something is changing now that there's a higher payoff for investing in that kind of thing.
We got a question from Carrie Listmore, who is also with University of Guelph. Thanks, Deb. One avenue for increasing efficiency in animal agriculture is through gene editing, yet public reaction is generally negative. Thoughts on how to manage this? I just have to say, when I first heard the term, GMOs have always had a negative connotation around them. And I heard gene editing and I thought, what have people done? And I was surprised that gene editing was a more accepted term than genetically modified organisms.
And so thanks, Carrie, and thanks, Jean. And I think it's because when we first heard about gene editing, we heard about that in the context of genetic diseases in humans and how we could help cure those kind of things. So some of the sickle cell syndrome in people, and some of the other genetic diseases where we could gene editing, and it's sounds like it can cure. I think allowed people to therefore have a second, not just a first reaction and say, maybe we need to look more differently about this. I think the continued emphasis that it is not inserting a gene from a different species into a species as opposed to turning genes on and off is helpful. And I think 20 years of the GMO conversation, which has gone on, continues, but on the other hand, I think the Center for Food Integrity is starting to show, that kind of level of distrust is at a level, but it's not growing. I'm not sure it's declining, but it's not really growing either. So it's kind of there, but I think those have all helped. But yeah, what scares me is the apparent ease by which this can be done. and so it doesn't have to be in a complicated, expensive laboratory, if I understand correctly. And therefore it doesn't have to be within an academic institution or anything. Lots of private money and private places going into that. And do we even really know what's happening in the world of gene editing? I suspect we're in grave danger of losing our understanding of that. And groups and organizations and researchers that believe in transparency and things like that are going to continue to be the face of it. In the meantime, things are just going to be happening.
Thanks. John Webb, who's has his own consulting, but he was formerly with Maple Leaf Foods. Yeah. Market access and closed borders for both imports and exports can seriously disrupt the industry. What should be Canada's position on self-sufficiency of food supply?
Well, there's an interesting question, eh? I'm not. If you wanted to talk about self-sufficiency in terms of just caloric intake, then that might be a goal that Canada could achieve. But I don't think that self-sufficiency is something that consumers, when you think about what's concerned for consumers as opposed to what's concerned from agriculture, I don't think it is something that they would embrace if they really understood what that meant. So, we want the oranges, we want the apples, we want the bananas this time of year. We don't just want the apple at this stage of year. So I don't think we could, I don't think it's a realistic, something that's realistic. And again, it comes from looking from the agriculture perspective, and it's true, and it is hugely disruptive. But most of Canadians are not agriculture based, and so I don't think that that's really anything that's really going to happen. Making sure this ongoing thing about making sure that where we can produce, fruits and vegetables and meat and grains and things like that, that we make sure we've got those systems working well within the country. I think they serve us well, not just from a trade perspective, but we saw what happened early days of COVID-19. We're still living with supply chain disruptions, right? So having shorter supply chains and making sure that we're doing that makes sense to me. Full self-sufficiency, again, just my opinion, doesn't strike me as something that's going to resonate very well.
Well, that kind of leads right into a question that Greg Devos has put in here. And he's wondering if you could speak to disruptions we're already seeing in further stratification of ag livestock products and moving away from generic commodities. Any opinion on where this will take us?
If you like generic commodities, I would argue things are going to get worse before they get better. I think diversification is absolutely where agriculture is going to need to go to be successful in the future. The technology allows us to understand people at a far more granular level now and people's preferences, and therefore the economics are someone's going to try and make money filling those niches. And if it isn't more conventional agriculture, it will be somebody else. So I think that the future is more, not less, and the faster we collectively get on that train, the better. They're economically. I think it's a little bit sad, I guess, for lack of a better word, because I think it's going to really take a toll then on agriculture organizations and farm organizations, and the model that we have where the sector speaks with one voice. And I think that's going to be really more and more challenged in the future because of that diversification, because, as I say, of the large farms and small farms and that middle farm kind of disappearing. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to hold together with one voice. And I don't know if that matters so much when it comes to selling products, but boy, it matters when it comes to tackling common challenges. That's like the animal diseases or the plant diseases, like climate change. That's where it matters, being able to come together. So I worry that that's going to be lost.
And Michael Loho has a question that sustainability of ag and food is critical. Just jumped on me. But it's hard for consumers to make valid comparisons between food sources, traditional versus cellular agriculture, for example. How can we ensure that consumers have fair comparisons such as peer-reviewed life cycle assessments?
Then I would argue that there's a couple ways I would do it. One, if you want to go through the market, it's a matter of offering that and showing consumers that here's a new tool that they can use. So they'll start at the other way is to move through a regulatory process, I guess, and say this is what we need in terms of consumer protection. That's a hard way to go. Governments set pretty high bars in terms of what they feel consumers need to be protected against, and mostly it is about transparency, I think, and safety, of course, that's fundamental. So really, I think it's a challenge and it's an opportunity, I think, to be saying, we've got this, we can show you these kind of things. What does that other person really have? I think, and I'm not an expert on consumer behavior and where consumers are thinking, so somebody else jump in if you are on this conversation, but I think consumers are getting tired of all the different labels and all the different titles, and they are looking for something that they can, is fact-based, they can trust, and they can dig deeper if they want to. And they don't all want to, but I think there's an opportunity there. There's a real opportunity for conventional ag to be leading the way on that one. But you also then need to be brutally fair and clean. And so that will involve exposing vulnerabilities, not just promoting the good stuff, if it's going to be successful in the long run.
Well, I'd like to end our webinar on time. I'm going to ask, this will be the last question. There are some questions still that we're not going to get to, but I will commit to people that we will get a response back to your questions. And on the recording at the end of it, we will put those questions so you can see what more questions that weren't being able to ask. But the last question from Jasper Monroe with Ag Sites.
Hey, Jasper.
What do you make of major investments of big tech in agriculture, such as Google, the Mineral Initiative, or Microsoft, Amazon with Bayer? Should we be excited or concerned that big tech is beginning to step into ag?
So here's what happens when people finally realize what agriculture has been saying for decades, like, hey, we're important, someone should be paying attention. Hey, you're important and someone is paying attention. And I think it's an incredible signal in terms of what they see as the potential. I think it's a signal that the world really has woken up, at least North America, and that maybe has been a little too complacent about food and food production and the role it plays in these kind of countries like Canada and the United States. So I think it's very exciting, but it's disruption. There's no doubt about it. When where are people going to go? Where's the money going to go? That's what you need to watch it. And it links really right back to Renee's question, doesn't it? Because those are the tools that big tech starts to bring. So yeah, it is a little bit of a be careful what you wish for. Agriculture is absolutely on the agenda and on the eyes of others. People get it. People get how important you are. They don't just necessarily see the world the way you see the world in terms of what agriculture is.
I used to always think that part of our problem in Canada was we'd never seen empty grocery shelves. And basically when the toilet paper got empty, it was amazing how people picked up. And we've seen things through COVID that we never thought consumers would see. And it has been an awakening for them.
Yeah, that I would argue, Jean, and that combination, I think BC has been, the natural disasters that they have gone through this past year has also been a huge awakening for us in terms of really understanding that that things are changing, and things can change very, very quickly. And when they do, the fundamentals become really important. And so you can only take your eye off the fundamentals for a while, and we've had our eye not on the fundamentals for a long time. And I think people are saying, yeah, it's time to look again.
So, well, thank you so much for joining us, Deb. It's been fascinating to get your ideas. And as I mentioned, there are some questions we didn't get to, unfortunately, but Deb has committed to providing us answers to those questions, and we'll get them back out to the people that asked them, but we also will include them in the recording. The recording will get up on YouTube. Hopefully, it'd be really nice to get it up tomorrow, but technology isn't always our friend when we go to do some stuff. But we will get it up by early next week. Mike mentioned in the beginning, we do have a couple ideas for future Horizon talks. We don't have any dates set at this time, but watch our website. We'll tweet stuff out. You can sign up for our newsletter to stay in touch with them. And if you have any ideas for topics that are important in the livestock industry, and you've got a topic you want to hear about, or you've heard an awesome speaker that should be shared, we'd love to hear from you. So our information is available on our website. Send us an email. And with that, thank you very much for joining us.